You've written that one of the reasons that made you think maybe these aren't schizophrenics aren't hallucinating is that there were patterns in the voices. You know, from one
Yes.
hospital to another across the country, they all said the same thing. What were those patterns?
Well, there's 23 of them, but the very first one I noticed. Well, the first thing I noticed is nobody was interested in the voices. They were all brainwashed to believe that these things were hallucinations. Nobody would. Here's hundreds of staff at this giant hospital I was working at. Not one of them was curious about what these voices were telling these people. But it was real clear that if they were listening to those voices, they were getting in trouble. They were getting in fights. They were getting in arguments. They were blowing their classes. They were getting in all kinds of trouble, after listening to the voices, So it was clear that their behavior and these voices were somehow linked, and nobody was curious about that. So I started asking them, and it took about a year to figure out how to talk to them about it, because there's no positive benefit for them to talk about the voices. They tell their friends, "Oh, hey, I'm hearing these voices that sound like demons, and they're telling me to do all this rotten stuff."
Yeah.
And their friends go, "Well, I'm getting away from you. You're spooky." So they lose their friends. They tell their parents, or they tell their relatives, and the relatives go, "Something's wrong with you," and they drag them into a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist gives them a diagnosis and puts them on these very toxic antipsychotic drugs that turns them into zombies.
Yeah.
They hate it.
Yeah.
So there's no positive benefit for them to tell anybody about the voices. And on top of that, the voices are telling them, if you tell anybody about us, they won't believe you. They're going to put you on meds and they're going to lock you up. And unfortunately, that's what happens.
Wow.
Okay?
And so those were the patterns. It was persistently negative things then, do these terrible things. And would they tell them stuff to isolate them, for instance? Like, oh, so-and-so doesn't like you.
The first pattern I noticed when I started asking these people was these voices were consistently, persistently negative. They didn't vary. They were always negative. They were always rotten. They tell them, like, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're gross, nobody likes you, you're going to fail at anything you try. The people are talking behind your back. I mean, any rotten thing that you could tell a person, these things were telling these people.
God.
And my first question is, why aren't they random like hallucinations? Why don't they sometimes tell them good stuff? Why don't they bad stuff and then neutral stuff and everything in between? It wasn't like that. It was consistently and persistently negative. The next question was, what is holding them on that pattern? Why aren't they random? Why aren't they acting like regular hallucinations? I've seen my share of hallucinations working in the field I did.
I bet.
These things did not match. They did not match medical hallucinations at all. They were consistently, persistently negative. All of them.
Wow.
And I've spoken to hundreds of schizophrenics, and they're all saying the same thing. Here's this negative, attacking, accusing, destructive, insulting, derogatory, abusive voice telling them rotten things about themselves and everybody else around them.